This is for John chapter 6, verses 1 through 14, the feeding of the 5,000, the answers to the questions on your worksheet. So we start with John chapter 5, verse 18 to get some context. The first question is, how is a son equal to his father? In Israel, the important thing was that you received the inheritance of the land. God had promised that they would receive the land. He'd promised that to Abraham, and then he had given that to the people under Joshua. And that inheritance would be passed down from father to son, to grandson to great-grandson, also passing down the promise. But having authority over that land was what made you an Israelite, and that's what gave you your position in society. That's what gave you value. And so a son is equal to a father because the son is going to inherit what the father has, and a son is going to have all control, all authority over that inheritance. Number 2, why did Jewish leaders want to kill Jesus? Well, the actual reason they wanted to kill Jesus is because he was challenging their authority. They had set up a system where they used the Mosaic laws to tell people what to do. And from that system, they gained wealth and influence. In chapter 5, we see that Jesus is healing on the Sabbath. They say this goes against our system, and so it challenges their power. But they're claiming that Jesus is violating commandment number 1. We shall have no other gods. They're saying that Jesus, by saying that he is equal to the Father, is saying that he is God, which, by the way, Jesus is God, and he is saying that. But they're telling the people, rather than that they're trying to protect their own power, that Jesus is violating God's laws, particularly the first commandment. Number 3, after having looked at the map, you see that Jesus is moving a lot. Why does he move so much from north to south in Israel? Well, one reason is so that he can share the word with everyone in Israel. His task is to bring to the people of Israel the message of salvation, the fact that the promises of God are complete. But also, Jesus is moving about because the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the powers of the time, are working against him, and they're a threat, and eventually they're going to kill him, but it's not time yet. So when he goes to Jerusalem, there's great danger. When he moves out in the countryside and he goes around and talks to various towns, the danger is less. Now we move to question 4, which is actually on our story. Why are people following Jesus? First, why are his disciples following him? Jesus' disciples have been following him since the baptism in the river by St. John the Baptist. They realize that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the promised one of God. And so they're following him to see the coming of God's kingdom occur, to see God's promises fulfilled. But we go to B, why are the great crowds following him? Well, they're following him to receive healing. He has done great signs, proving that he is a prophet of God, and it is of great benefit to those who receive the blessings. Certainly, they also want the prophet to come, but I think their first and primary concern is present, that they want to be physically healed, and eventually they start wanting to be physically fed. And C, why do you follow him? This you should answer on your own. Let's move to number 5. Jesus is acting as a king when he takes care of the physical needs of the crowds by feeding them. What does Philip think about buying food for such a vast crowd of 5,000 men and women and children? Well, Philip thinks it's impossible. He says 200 denarii, 200 days' wages, would not be enough to even begin to feed this vast crowd. There's no money that we even begin to have. You would have to be a king. You would have to have the vast wealth of taxation from an entire land in order to feed a crowd like that, even at one meal. And so Philip sees an insurmountable problem, and he is being a little sarcastic when he comes to Jesus and says, "Why are you giving me an impossible task?" Number 6. A boy volunteers 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. What are we to think of this boy's small gift of 7 things? 7, like the days of creation. Well, when you look at it from the perspective of the world, from reason and rationality, this gift is nothing. Why would the boy waste it? He should keep it for himself. He's not going to feed anyone. And if everybody gets one little bite, which everybody wouldn't, just a few people would, that would be worse than if one person gets a whole meal and actually gets some benefit from it. So the world would say this is pathetic. But God says otherwise. Like the widow and her mite who gives the last of her coins, the boy is giving the last of his food out of love for God and for the people of God. And when they receive this great gift, they should receive it with joy, knowing that God will make use of it according to his plans, and he can take the smallest thing and do vast and wonderful things with it. This includes our small gifts. Number 7, everyone eats. 12 baskets of leftovers are gathered. Why 12? Well, 12 shows up in the Bible often, doesn't it? There are 12 tribes of Israel, 12 sons of Jacob. There are 12 disciples. There's many other 12s. 12 in the Bible represents the totality of God's people. And so when Jesus feeds all the people, there's enough left over for the totality of God's people. There's 12 basketfuls of bread that are gathered up, which are left over for people to be cared for. God is always going to feed all of his people, not just the 5,000 or later the 4,000 with these great miracles. He feeds us today. Through the coronavirus, he's still feeding us. Stores are still open, trucks are still delivering, and he will take care of all of his people through all time. One little note, often, evidently, people of the time carried kind of fold-up baskets around with them. And so it was probably fold-up baskets that people would wear, kind of like a backpack, that was used to gather the bread in. Number 8, what is a prophet? And I don't say P-R-O-F-I-T here. A prophet is a person who speaks for God, which makes the prophet the person who speaks for God, the singular person, the greatest prophet, in other words, the Messiah, the one who comes to fulfill God's promises to his people, the one who comes to give them all the things that God had promised through the Old Testament prophets. That's Jesus, the prophet. And 9, do we have to worry about being taken care of today? Well, as I said with the 12 baskets, no. God gives us our daily bread. He does it every day. We're not supposed to worry about tomorrow. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. It's been kind of surprising lately because of this coronavirus thing. It didn't bring what we expected. But God will continue to take care of us. Yes, sometimes death does come. There are famines and pestilence, as we're experiencing right now. Pestilence means disease. But God will care for us, just like he cared for those crowds. He is still our king, and he still does his kingly duties, and he does them perfectly. Thank you very much. We will continue with our next lesson next time.